If you struggle telling your story, whether it is fear of being judged or labeled or maybe exposing others that you love, this episode's for you. Today I connected with Irene from Irene's Entropy, who is a musician and content creator, and she's built a big ol' community around her journey of leaving Mormonism and rebuilding her life and career after leaving literally everything and having to start all over. She changed her name.
And I started using Irene as almost this alter ego character. And it was almost a joke at first. And then it became more serious.
She began sharing her story with others and then quickly realized.
That's when I really started taking seriously the idea of not storytelling for the world. I needed to understand my own story as a character in my life.
Although her story is complex, she has mastered a way to communicate it through her music and short form content. And my guess is maybe you have a complex story too, but there is a way to communicate it effectively, but it's gonna require something.
It really all comes back to self-awareness, emotional awareness, and understanding your goals and where you're going. And then being okay if the public doesn't see you for who you are yet, and know that they will if you keep moving towards your goal.
Well, this is a good one, y'all. This is Irene. Irene, you're sitting on an airplane and somebody looks over at you. You're not flying it, you're just sitting on it, okay? Somebody looks over at you. I've never had to say that to anybody, by the way, before. And they go, what do? How do you answer that simple question?
I'm a storyteller. I tell stories that inspire people to change. And I do it through many, many different ways. But everything I do revolves around storytelling, with the idea that anyone who listens to the story is inspired to take it in and apply lessons to their own life and learn and change.
At what point did you start identifying as a storyteller first?
It took a while, I think, because I had so many premonitions that I wanted to be a musician or an engineer or so many different things. But all of the things that I wanted to be, it ended up that me telling stories about becoming the things that I wanted to be was what initially got the most attention on social media or from others. And I realized that everybody related to what I was doing, not necessarily because they wanted to be an engineer or a musician, but everybody wants to learn and everybody wants to change. And the way that I could connect with everyone was through relating through my story. And so when I started identifying as a storyteller, I think everything else in my life started taking off because I could talk about anything I wanted as long as I was telling a story and connecting it to the people on the internet or people in my own personal life, really.
I think most people listening to this desire to step into that a little bit more. We mentioned before we hit record, it requires two things. It requires a hell of a lot of vulnerability. And then, it takes a skill set. And so you're dealing with an internal level of, am I okay with sharing some things that are pretty heavy, pretty dark, pretty scary, pretty vulnerable? Don't always put me in the best light. And then two, when you get to that point of jumping off, you're like, well, how the hell do I frame this in a way where people even know what the hell I'm talking about? Yeah. So bravo to you. You've done an incredible job. People freaking love you. When I said I was having you on the show, I had people I didn't even know who knew who you were. And they're like, I love her. So people really admire your work. And you've done a really good job of building community around your own story. Tell me what you had to tackle first. Was it the internal demon of figuring out how to tell your story, or did you struggle more with the tactical side?
I love that you're asking me this because I think a lot of people look at my stuff and they think, oh, it's so easy. She does it so easily. Why is it so hard for me? I am here to set the record straight that for the longest time, I had been songwriting, and quick blip about that. I love songwriting because I think that anything that has to do with condensing an entire topic to 3 minutes or 4 minutes, or condensing an entire book of thought a lifetime of experience into a page of poetry. When you can be creative about the way that you're condensing your experience, it filters everything into this core subject matter. And so for me, that's what songwriting did for me. It was a way for me to filter very big, broad subjects down to what does this really mean to me? And so I encourage people to think about that. If you're going to think about being a storyteller, think about the way you're going to condense. Is it poetry? Is it music? Is it just writing, journaling? It's very important. So with that being said, I had been songwriting for a while, but my wonderful husband, who I refer to as the ecologist on my platform. So if you guys aren't familiar with that, when I say the ecologist, he truly is an ecologist by trade, but he is my husband. And he kept saying, you have to just tell your story. You have to just tell it. And I would sit down and I would try to record it. And it was hard. It was so hard. Where do you even begin? What do I even talk about? I've lived through so much, and the ideas that I have of what I want to do with my life and my music and my story. And so 2 things. 1, it is very hard. Find ways. Number 2 is find ways to condense your story so that you can look through it in chapters. For me, it was through music. But the 3rd thing is you just have to start. Because if you go back on my platform, I don't delete this stuff. I want people to go back and look at me as a storyteller 2 or 3 years ago, and you'll see me telling my story. But it took me years to build a platform where I was good enough to have chapters and people following, and just the talent that comes with storytelling. Because how much of cliffhangers do you leave for people, or how much comedy do you put in, or serious subjects, or vulnerability? Like, there are reels out there where I'm bawling my eyes out, and I almost didn't post it because it's just so hard, but you learn as you go. So yeah, just start and it gets better. That was a lot.
Now, before I'm gonna like really geek out with you in a minute. Like, we're gonna get into some super witty storytelling stuff because I think you're brilliant at it. But before then, you have done countless interviews. You've spent hours sharing your story online. So today we're not necessarily going to dig into your story because it's been documented, and I'll link up a couple of really good pieces from you. I mean, through your music, also just your own channel, so forth. So guys, if you want to hear like the depths of Irene's story and all that, it's out there. We're going to talk about how to tell your story here. But for those folks who don't know you, don't know who you are, and they need context of like the overview of what your story is, I mean, you can tackle that whatever way you want. But what's important for people to know about you before we start learning about the way you frame your story?
Yeah, wonderful question. I think a lot of people know me for the trauma or religious trauma I went through as a young child. I was raised in a very Orthodox Mormon home, and there was some other family trauma with that. I often say that my story is not about religion. I don't care what you believe or how you find peace in your life, but for me, my parents used this particular religion as a tool to raise their children that ended up in some very traumatic circumstances for me, including sexual abuse or other forms of abuse. And so I served my Mormon mission. I came back. I ended up leaving the church. I became estranged from my family and was left with nothing. And I rebuilt myself from there. I ended up getting a degree in mechanical engineering. I now work as an electromechanical engineer, project engineer now. And I have a love for math, for physics. I also started writing my story through music. I became a musician. So I released music out into the world. I tell my story through music videos on my social media platforms, but that's why I say I'm a storyteller. Sometimes I use math or physics to tell a story. Sometimes I use music. But at the end of the day, my job is to convince or inspire people, motivate people that you can always learn and change. I never thought I would be here. And I wasn't, the whole other part of my story that I think is important contextually is that I wasn't born with the name Irene. Irene was a name that was given to me in a secret ceremony, and that name was supposed to be kept secret for the rest of my life. And I took a huge step this year, actually, and I legally changed my name to Irene. And so for me, quite literally the brand of Irene's Entropy is that I have created something from nothing, something that was supposed to be this secret my entire life. And now I've created this brand that represents you can become something, you can learn, and you can change. Irene was not supposed to exist in this world, but now everybody knows me as Irene. And the things that I stand for as Irene, that's what I think is so powerful about Irene's Entropy. So I guess that's everything about me in a nutshell.
When you say secret ceremony, do you mean from the church? Like they had a secret ceremony called Irene?
Yes. So in Mormonism, when I came of age at 19, I went through a ceremony where you learn basically all these ceremonial handshakes and signs and tokens that get you into heaven when you die. And one of those things is a new name. So I was given a new name, Irene, which was supposed to be kept secret, and I was never to reveal to anyone until I died.
So that's a thing, like everybody, it's a secret name.
Yes, if you know a Mormon and they've been through that ceremony, they have a secret name.
And Entropy. I think this is interesting. Where did that come from? You explaining this shows how deep AF you are. Like you're the deepest person ever.
I'm happy you asked, and I'm going to try to keep it concise because I could go on and on about it. But entropy is the second law of thermodynamics. And basically all you need to know about entropy is that entropy is all about expansion of energy. So if you have a cup of coffee and it's hot, and that energy is going to dissipate and it's going to go out into the world in way of heat. That happens at every level. The sun putting energy in concise rays into the earth, and then plants grow, and then animals eat plants, and we eat animals, and all of this, like that energy from the sun coming in, it expands in our world. And the one thing about entropy is that it's linked with time. Entropy generally it can only move forward with time, and it can't be reversed. And so for me, Irene's Entropy is all about the idea that I have made a decision in my life. You know, I ripped my world apart and I started over with a new identity, and I can only move forward with that identity. I can never go back. And the things that I've learned and that I've become, and the way that my energy has spread out into the world now through music and storytelling, it can never be reversed. And I just think it's so beautiful from a physics standpoint and an artistic standpoint. So that's why it's Irene's Entropy.
So cool. How long ago did all this go down where you left and started building your life again? How many years ago was that?
6 years ago.
6 years. Okay.
I'm 27 and I was 21 whenever I first left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I've questioned a lot my pull towards sharing things of, you know, where is the line with you want to share because it's cathartic and yada yada versus a calling. And I don't know where you sit on the conversation of calling and all of that stuff, but sometimes you just feel really, really led to do something. I'm just curious with you, how did you kind of conceptualize and know that this is something you actually needed to pursue, sharing this part of your life and really put time and effort into it versus it just being a release? You know what I'm saying? Like we got that,
yeah,
I need to release my story and get it out for myself versus this really isn't about me. I really think I'm called to do this.
Yeah. If I were to answer that honestly, the idea of becoming Irene started out, I don't necessarily want to use the word ego. It was a necessity. Like it almost started out as a joke. And I've never said this on a podcast before. This is new information. But it was right around COVID and all of the gyms had shut down. And I had been taking pole dancing classes for exercise. And I remember the gym shut down, and I asked my husband, I was like, do you think we could put a pole up in the home? And he was like, twist my arm. Okay, we'll get one. So through COVID, I did pole because that was the only form of exercise I could really get. We didn't have gym equipment. But he was like, well, what's your name? Like, what's your fun, sexy name you're going to use? When you go into that identity or that character. And I started using Irene, and I was like, it's Irene. And he was like, that's odd. Like, what an odd name to choose. Why would you choose Irene? And then I confessed, I said, well, it's actually my secret name. It was supposed to get me into heaven. And like, so I ended up using it as almost this alter ego character. And then I started writing music under that alias of Irene. Was this almost this character. I looked at her as this third party character, and I would jump into the idea of writing music as Irene. And it was almost a joke at first. And then it became more serious as I started delving through my trauma and digging into why am I the way I am? And what do these experiences in my past as this holy, very spiritual figure, because religion was huge for me in my life. And Irene was a huge part of that. So anyways, as I dug through and I started writing more serious music, I started recognizing how important Irene was to me in my life. And I think that's when I really started taking seriously the idea of not storytelling for the world. I needed to understand my own story as a character in my life. And so I started journaling more. I had, by the way, at this point, I had deleted all of my social media. I was free of social media for maybe 2 or 3 years. I had no contact with the world. Nobody knew who I was. I just disappeared. I changed my phone number, deleted social media. And when I came back on the internet, at that point, I emerged as Irene of Irene's Entropy. And so it's kind of funny because I took the time to understand myself and become who you see as Irene now on the internet. But the stories that I'm telling happened at least 5-6 years ago. And I tell it now as I am the narrator of my story. I created Irene as a character. And then I came to understand myself, and self-awareness made all the difference in my storytelling of what I do online now. That was a long bit about
I love that answer.
Identity.
No, yeah. I was just re-listening to an interview I did several years ago with Paul Young, who wrote The Shack. And I was asking him about deconstruction and I said, this is like Heather 5 years ago. How do you deal with people's backlash and people getting upset with you with all the things that you say or whatever? Isn't that hard? Isn't that terrible? He goes, not when you know who you are. And I loved that because it was coming back to yourself and getting grounded, like first knowing you. And I think you said it without saying it, such an important piece for step one of quote telling your story is, do you feel at home in yourself first? Right? Yeah. And returning, giving yourself the space and the time to actually do that. And I think it's awesome that you took 2 years just to be off social and to heal or whatever. I wanted to ask you, what was kind of like your first piece, your thing that you gave to the world as Irene? Was it a song? Was it a blog? Was it a video? What was the very first thing where you put yourself out there and started sharing your story?
It was the development of my first album called High Water, which I look back now as this just very much of a gem, this piece of, I was very innocent when I wrote it. I was discovering for the first time what it meant to have real relationships with people. I had grown up in a world where I loved everybody and my relationships were a mile wide but an inch deep. And so when I left and I was first developing my perspectives on what does it mean to love someone, what are the types of love you can have for friends, for partners, for family members. And I was also falling in love at the time with who my now husband is, and we got married. And so to me, it's this very innocent, beautiful album that I'll probably go back and revisit at some point in my career. But right now it just kind of sits there, and not many people know it or recognize it because I was so unknown when I released it. But that was my first step of coming into the world, was this offering of High Water, this album that was all about relationships that I was discovering in my life.
This is a very specific question to those who have stories related to religion. There's been a fear that I've had to really wrestle with on and off over the past several years that I recognize. It's almost like you can tangibly see the fear as like this entity outside of yourself that comes and visits you every once in a while. But it's this fear of, what if I'm wrong? Because you grow up in some kind of deep embedded thought and belief and faith. And when you consciously choose to step out of that because you really believe and know now that there's more out there, but that little demon, that fear of, yeah, but you're going to go to hell. What if you're wrong? What if they were right and you're going astray or whatever? I'm curious how you've navigated that, if at all, and if it still comes up for you. Some of that what if I am wrong?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I get that question all the time, and I'll say here what I've said to everybody else who has, because I think the most common question I get on my social media is people saying, well, what do you believe now? What are your religious beliefs now? And I say, I will never say that online, on any podcast. It's not my job to influence people or to talk about my specific religious beliefs. However, I will say, dealing with that thought of, what if I'm wrong, as you're moving from one spiritual perspective of thinking to another? I think it really comes down to self-awareness and the idea that having such confidence in your morals and ethics and integrity that you are building in yourself, no matter what spiritual form or what realm you're moving into, if you have such confidence in your intentions and the way that you are approaching understanding life, and you know that your morals and your ethics are solid, at the end of the day, if you died and whoever you were talking to is some form of energy or spirit or heaven or hell or whoever I stood face to face with, I would know you are talking to the purest form of me. I spent my life making sure that I was so true and authentic to myself. What do you have for me? What questions do you have for me? A lot of times I talk about the 8 Mile mentality, where Eminem gets up in that rap battle and he's talking like, I am white trash. I do live in a trailer. I do this. Like, I picture that as at the end of my life or at any point in my career, and somebody has something to say to me in this life or in the next or wherever I am Irene. And I did make these decisions, and I'll tell you exactly why I made them. I know who I am. What do you have to say to me? It could be a God, it could be a spirit, it could be a person. I don't care who it is. It's me. And whether I was wrong or I was right, I was doing my best to exercise my morals and my ethics to get there.
Freaking mic drop. I love that. Context for your story, but you could sit here probably for 3 hours and tell me your story and still obviously miss parts of it or whatever. I think that's I love that you said at the beginning, you need to add restriction. I mean, Rick Rubin talks a lot about that, and Creative Act about adding restriction to creativity actually enriches it. When we think about kind of coming out with our story and sharing everything that's happened and the full context of it, you can't do that over and over and over again. What I love about what you chose to do is you put it in a series of music videos. So when I first met you, you're like, yo, start here. And here's the series, and you can learn about who I am, which was like the most badass way to share your story, by the way. The videos are so
that's
cool.
funny.
But I'm curious, do you recommend like people putting their story in one place, like through an art piece or whatever? Because I think sometimes we feel like I don't know how to jump into something that would take me 6 hours to tell.
Yep. Start with what you know. That's what I would say, because you only know what you know when you know it. And I first went viral on social media 2 years ago, and I was telling my story very quickly. I gave like a very condensed version that was more dramatic, I would say, with a lot of cliffhangers, and people just grabbed onto it, and it got millions of views and attention. But I was not prepared in any way, shape, or form 2 years ago to tell my story the way that I tell it now. And I would say this: you can recycle your story, because as you grow and learn and change, your perspective on yourself as a character within your own story changes. And so I told my whole story like 2 years ago. Granted, a lot of details were left out because I was moving through it quickly. But that's where I started first getting a following. And then I decided, because I time everything with the release of my music. For me, and here's the other thing: if you're going to tell your story, you have to be telling your story with a purpose, of some passion. And for me, that's the creativity of music and these visual music videos that I have coming out. So that's my purpose. I love the creativity and the art behind being a musician and an artist. But telling my story contextually in between is where I've matured enough to the point where I know my story matters and people relate to it. And so now I do longer storytelling. You could go back 2 years ago and find me talking about me meeting my husband. But now it's taken me 2 years of slow storytelling, of getting into the details of how did I emotionally feel when my world collapsed and fell apart? How did I change? How did I learn? And be okay with the fact that your story might change when you retell it or look back upon it, as you're growing your brand or your platform, whatever context you're telling your story for.
You mentioned cliffhangers. You mentioned slowing your story down and getting into the emotion of it. Digging a little bit more about what you've learned over the past few years, because you've been telling the quote same story in different ways over and over again. The story's probably even evolved, since then. But what like little tactical things have you learned as far as keeping people engaged with it, keeping it fresh, keeping it new? Because I know a lot of times people will say, they're like, are people going to get so bored hearing about Aunt Janet and the pie and the thing that happened that one time? You know what I'm saying?
Yep. And the truth is, I ask myself those same questions. Are people going to get bored? And sometimes I let that vulnerability through, and I'll say in a reel, like, I know this might seem boring to you guys, but to me, it's really important that I include these characters in the story. And I always get people that comment and say, girl, yes, this matters to me, because I'm at this place in my life where the situation has happened. And I think you just have to have that belief that no matter what you are sharing, if it's important to you and it's an important piece of your story, chances are you're one of 8 billion people on this planet, and people have similar experiences, and people are going through something similar. And even if the general public might not find it interesting, the ones that need it will find it. Energy matches energy that it needs to find. And then trust that it's all about time. And as you build your story and you build your own understanding of yourself, people also recognize confidence and authenticity. I feel as if That's a tangent I don't know if we want to go on, but like, and this is not to cut down anyone else that's putting stuff out on social media. I love comedy and watching the fun little reels that people do of dances or stuff. Like, there's something for everyone. So I'm not cutting anyone down when I say this. But I do think that the general public has been oversaturated with these very short reels that are just to grab your attention, and it's all about speaking an emotion, and then but there's no real meat to the message, you know. And so people are desperately looking for places where they can find authenticity. I'm not just trying to get you here because I want you to click and I want you to buy something and I want you to do this. Like, don't get me wrong, storytelling can absolutely be used for marketing, and it should be used to sell your product. However, there should be authenticity in the way that you believe in what you're selling or what you're giving people, because we're so starved for authenticity in this world. When we see it, we recognize it and we like it and we want it. And that's what I've found in my platform, is that people don't even follow me because they like my music, which, you know, earlier on I was a bit heartbroken, like, oh, like, they don't, like, I only have this many followers or this many views on my music videos. But then I looked at it and I kind of thought about it, how beautiful that even though I'm quote unquote selling, not that I make money off of my music really, but like, I'm selling my music, or I'm selling something that I'm putting out into the world. However, people are following me and connecting with me because of relating to the authentic way that I'm telling my story. And I've come to just love and accept that. Yeah. So it's, that's my tangent, is that no matter the reason for wanting to grow your brand, or if you're going to sell something, there's a way of doing it with authenticity. And you need to think about how your personal self-awareness and story relates to what you are selling.
Preaching. I was curious about being typecast, I guess would be the word. Maybe it's not the word. I don't know. But if you go down this road of sharing your story about leaving religion and this very specific, like, Mormon, like, it's so specific. And, you know, obviously a ton of people who came from your world are going to follow you because they know the specifics of that, right? How do you, or I guess, do you worry about, have you faced kind of just like, hey, are people only going to see me as the ex-Mormon girl versus all these other things that you are? You know, you're an advocate for women in STEM, you're a musician, you're an artist, you're a writer, you do all these other things, you're freaking flying airplanes. Like, what the hell? Like, you do so much cool stuff. And I'm just curious, like, I know I worry too about, like, the more I share the personal nitty gritty stuff, is that all people are going to see?
I think, and I don't want this to be diluted by the fact that I am young, and I know and I recognize that, but it's trusting time with whatever time you have or whatever time you want to dedicate to your storytelling, or whatever reason why you want to look into doing that. It's almost like a trust fall of trusting yourself and time, in that whatever your purpose is and whatever you are moving towards, it will reveal itself. When I first started, absolutely, I was labeled as the ex-Mormon girl. And I had to keep, and not even defensively, but I just kept mentioning in my reels, by the way, we're going to talk about my struggles with my identity today, because this is not about me being ex-Mormon. This is about me struggling with my identity. And I had to know, and this comes from a lot of internal self-work of, you know, being an artist and planning my album and my release and my storytelling and where I was going, which is not always, you don't see it at the time, just keep moving forward. It will reveal itself to you. But I had to understand people aren't going to see or recognize who I am right now. People are going to see me as the ex-Mormon girl. But if I just keep moving forward in my story, public's going to get it. They're going to catch on because they're going to see I am so happy in my life. I am an advocate for engineering, for women in STEM, for aviation, flying airplanes, or a couple of my math reels have gone viral now. And I've had opportunities to connect with other women in STEM or things that would not have happened for me a year ago. But I had trust in the process that it's okay if the people commenting on my stuff right now don't get it. It's okay if they see me as this version of me because I know what I'm moving towards and I know who I am. It really all comes back to self-awareness, emotional awareness, and understanding your goals and where you're going. And then being okay if the public doesn't see you for who you are yet, and know that they will if you keep moving towards your goal.
I have the hardest time believing you're 27. Like, you look young, but what comes out of your mouth is like the wisdom of like 150-year-old. I'm telling you what, girl, like, where did all your freaking wisdom come from? Like, it's blowing my mind. You're 10 years younger than me. And I'm like, you need to mentor me. You are so freaking wise. Holy crap.
I owe so much of it to the experiences I've had in life, and also the fact that I'm married to a man 15 years older than me who has been through so much, and his story is not mine to tell. I'll never tell his story on my social media. But the combination of our worlds and the way that my husband and I have connected, we often say that our love story is a recipe to freedom. And I love that. Side note, in my social media right now, I'm at the storytelling portion where I talk about how him and I met. I'm so grateful that I am so young. And the one thing that my husband has given me is time. I had somebody comment on, sorry, another slight tangent right now, but I had somebody comment on a reel the other day, and they said, stop giving credit to your husband, basically. Like, you would have found your way out and you would have been you no matter what. And you don't, basically, like, you don't need no man, or you don't, and I just thought, oh, like, what a misconception. I'm not talking about giving credit to another person because I'm codependent on them. I was given the gift of time because at a very young age, 21, 22 years old, I met someone who was further along in their storyline, and they gifted me, and I was willing to listen. They gifted me the ability to look at time differently and to look at life differently. And I had the ability to start developing maturity in a different way at a young age. And also, most people don't go through a complete alienation and separation from their families at the age of 21. Like,
yeah,
having to believe so strongly in the path that I was taking that I was willing to actually leave my community and my friends and my family behind. Like, a lot of people have to go through loss in their lives, and they go through separations and breakups or divorce or loss of a job or moving on. But mine was so, it was just so much at such a young age. And it's kind of like, like pressure just reveals diamonds. I think the circumstances of the way that I had to develop perspective at a young age have totally led to a different path in my life. But I owe so much of it to my wonderful husband. So giving him that shout out, I'm talking about him on my social media right now. And that's my tangent. Sorry.
I love how much you love him, and I don't think it doesn't take away from your strength. If anything else, it adds to it. I tell Brian this all the time. I'm like, it takes strength to be with strong women. So it doesn't make you less of a man, it makes you a stronger man. I think us elevating each other's strengths is like not a point to weakness. It's a point that we're strong enough to say, this person's a badass and I learned so much from them and I'm strong enough to admit that. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted to ask you, before we get into these listener questions, I'm glad you brought up the series with your husband because I was just watching that. And you deliver things so easily. You have a really great delivery style where it feels like that you're just shooting the shit. You know what I mean? Like, and then he invited me on this flower walk and I'm going to go move to the sauna. And you're just like seamlessly going through this and to the naked eye and be like, oh, she's just chilling with us talking. And you are, I know that you are really good and intentional with telling stories, and not that you scripted it out or you're performing or anything like that, but you have thought through the structure of the story and your opening loops and your closing loops. And there's just so much in that little 3-4 video thing that you did. Pull out anything out of the thing that you did. They're telling the story of your husband, and I'll link it up so everybody can know. Just a small little tactable thing that you did that most people who don't understand story would have never been able to pick out.
I think, and this is where it's so funny because my husband and my stepson, who I never mentioned on my social media, by the way, if you've made it this far in the podcast, perhaps you deserve to know I have a stepson. But they make fun of me all the time because I'm so quirky in the way that I'm telling a story. And they'll listen to my reels and they'll be like, oh my God, you went there? Really? Like, but I'm so comfortable. Again, I'm so comfortable in the way that I'm telling the story that it is so me to talk about my inner nerd or how ridiculous it is that I chose to write my husband an essay, or that most people are sliding into DMs with sexy pictures of themselves and instead I'm sending pictures of plants. Like, what is this? Great Angelica. Like I'm so comfortable with the fact that I am a nerd. I am different. I am, but I take comedy in that fact. And then I hope that other people see the comedy in it. And up until this point, I feel like most have. But be comfortable in your sense of humor. Be comfortable in the way that you see the world or the way you think a story should be told. If you go back in my reels, like to 2 or 3 years ago, I did not have that ease. It's almost more choppy, the way that I'm trying to be serious or the way I'm trying to talk about a subject. And that's okay. That's where I was then. But I much prefer to tell it with personality now. And so if you're looking to do that, know that that will come. And it's okay if your storytelling, the way that you storytell changes over time. And eventually it just becomes you. And it is really like shooting the shit with someone because I'm making the story. And last night we were playing Wii golf and I was cracking up laughing. And my stepson goes, oh my God, are you watching a video of yourself right now? Are you laughing at yourself? And I was like, yeah, I am. That was so funny. And then they were making fun of me for like 10 minutes. But it's just being so comfortable with yourself that you're able to put yourself out there. And no matter what somebody says, you're like, yeah, I said that. Yeah, I think I'm funny. Yeah. And sometimes you look back a year later and you'll be embarrassed. Like, we've come so far. But knowing that no matter who you are in a future version of yourself, you can look back and know that person was doing their best. And I love them for doing their best at that time. So
that's why I leave in, whenever I mispronounce words, I always leave it in my reels. And people, like I've had people say, like some girl commented the other day, like, you don't have to fake all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, that's not fake. That is literally me. I mispronounce words every day. Like I can barely even read, you know what I'm saying? So I leave it in because I think it's hilarious. Yeah, I get that. I get that. Let's do some listener questions. These are so freaking good. Thank you to everybody who sent them in. We have Miss Sabrina Mina who asked, how are you so comfortable and confident while being raw and real?
Because I had to sit and be raw and real with myself first. I once Once and again, for me, a lot of that is songwriting. Once I'm okay enough to admit to myself, either like, oh, girl, like you got problems, or you're working through problems, or empowerment of like, girl, you did that. I'm so proud of you. Like once I'm able to fully accept it myself, it's okay if the general public sees it, and I don't care what their opinion is because I've already worked through my own understanding of myself. Simple but true.
Boom. Mac Brogan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hardest part of CPSD, sharing my past with others without being perceived as a victim. I want to relate to others, but sharing seems to bring the mood down or ends with an I'm sorry.
Yes. I feel this comment so much because I still get people that comment on my stuff and they say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I'm so sorry you had to go through this. And I've gotten to the point where I used to think that I had to defend myself to every person and say, you don't need to be sorry for me. I'm working through this and I'm okay. And you don't need to be sorry because this is my life now. But then it just became, I don't need to reply to everyone. Again, I just need to be so confident in myself that like, I know I'm okay. I know that I only shared that with the internet because I was so okay with myself that I don't care what their opinions are. And so even if they're sorry, keep watching. Go watch me fly this plane. Go watch me do this with my husband. Go watch me release this music video because I am okay. Or if I'm not okay, I'm the one that controls that. And so for you, if you're dealing with CPTSD or people that think you're a victim, it's all about how you look at yourself. You're going to hear me say this again and again because, man, it's the truth. It's all about how you look at yourself. If you look at yourself as a victim, everyone's going to see that you're a victim and everyone's going to talk to you as a victim. If you see yourself as not a victim, many people will see that. Not all, but many people will say, oh, like they're not a victim, and they recognize that and they can talk to you in a different way. Some people, most of the time, people that themselves still treat themselves with victim mentality will not be able to talk to you in that realm. They will stay in victim mentality because that's the only way they can perceive the world. Be okay that not everybody perceives the world in the same way as you. And you can politely thank them. You can politely have conversation, but know that the conversations you're truly holding space for in your life is finding people that are on a level of talking to you not as a victim.
That's Sisha. Sisha asked, what tools, practices, or mantras would you give to someone embarking on a reflective redirection?
To learn is to change. Two things I would say. To learn is to change, and don't ever stop asking why. I think a lot of times we ask why, but if you go like, fuck around, find out. A lot of people can go and ask why, and they can poke, but once you learn something, that there is an opportunity for you to change based on what you have learned. And many people will ask why. They'll dig something up and they'll learn something about themselves or about their environment that they're living in. And then they are not brave enough to choose to change based on what they have learned. And therefore you have learned nothing at all. If you don't change, you have not learned anything. And it might take you, and I'm saying this is, you can learn the same thing like 5 or 6 times, 100 times, and sometimes it gets repetitive. But the second you actually change either your perspective or something physical in your life or whatever, the second you decide to change, that's when you've actually learned. Everything else has just been a stepping stone on the way to what you have learned that has caused you to commit to a change in your life.
So freaking good. I left this in here because I thought it was freaking awesome. The ecologist asked, does she know how proud her husband is?
That's adorable. Yeah, I do know how
So
proud he
sweet.
is. No, that's so sweet. I do know how proud he is, and I hope that anyone watching, if you have a partner in crime that you're just working through the daily grind with and you're building something with, let them know you're proud of them and that you see the changes that they're making and that you're willing to learn and change with them, because my husband is great at that and I appreciate him. Beautiful.
Cowboy Bugler asked, when sharing your story, did your thoughts and emotions change or evolve when you retrospectively look back at the time when you were serving your mission?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think me storytelling on social media is as much for me as it is for the audience, because I've thought through things before, but the second that I share them and then it is open to the public, I've opened myself up to, again, maintaining confidence in myself and the way that I understood myself when I put it out there. But I'll look back at things that I posted this summer and I think, oh, wow, like my perspective on that has changed. And definitely, especially because I'm condensing such large portions of my life into 90-second reels, it's another form of extracting out the way that I feel about a situation. And sometimes I'll try to record the same reel 3 times, and my message by the end of it has changed because I've learned so much about myself in the time that I've tried to condense a message in 90 seconds. So yeah, a lot changes for me when I'm storytelling.
I think that's kind of the whole point of it. It's a beautiful part of it, at least. Clint asked, I love this one. What is one story that you hesitated to share but had the biggest impact?
I think the section of my story where I talk about my mom, and I talked about, and it's definitely the most vulnerable reel I've shared, where I'm in my car. I just got done playing pool volleyball and my hair's wet and I'm in my car. And I decided to talk about my mom. And when my mom wrote to me that she would be proud of me if I died serving my Mormon mission. And I was prepared to share that part of the story and keep a straight face and just talk about it matter of factly and move forward. But I broke down bawling my eyes out, just tears, snot, the whole 10 yards. And I kept recording it. And then I got done and I thought, is this really something I want to share on the internet? And because I think people would focus, I was so worried that people would focus on her mom's bad. Her mom is this. And like my mom is my own, her own person that's on her own journey in life. And I hold no bitterness towards. I hold accountability and I hold boundaries, but I don't hold bitterness towards her. And I was so worried about putting it out on the internet. But I ended up doing it. And the amount of people that came forward to me in private messages, comment sections, talking about their relationships with their parents and loved ones, but mostly a mother or a father wound, was overwhelming. And I shared a song I wrote called To the Wolves that I wrote when I was in pain, about my mother-daughter relationship, and the amount of people that commented on that and told me how much, because it's unreleased, and so much. And that's the entropy working, right? That's just all this energy and chaos happening because I took one moment where I was brave enough to insert my energy into the world, and it expanded in ways that I couldn't even imagine. So that's the power of vulnerability, I think.
At Play and Explore asked, how do you mute the haters in your mind so you don't feel it in your body?
Oh, wow.
All right.
I think I use comedy a lot. because to me, I've reached the point where I love myself and my journey so much. And I'm so aware of if I do fuck up or I make a mistake, like I'm using my morals and my ethics to guide myself, and I'm going to right my ship, and I'm going to be okay. That like when people comment with hate, it's almost funny to me because it's just like, oh my God, like you have no idea what you're talking about, and you have no idea who I am or where I'm going. And their comments are a reflection of the way they feel about themselves. They do not have the maturity or the integrity to comment something that would add something to the conversation. Even if it's them disagreeing with something that I've put out in the world, if they don't have the capability of posing a question or having a conversation with maturity and with the ability to talk about their perspective, then they're not matching my energy. And why would I give that any more time than just to laugh and think, I hope they get there one day. Good on them. I hope they get there in their journey, but they're not where I am right now, and that's fine. But I only want to talk to people and engage with people that are on my level or are trying to talk with me on my level.
Nailed it. TJ Tyler. Hi, TJ. You're the best. I love him. What are the most effective ways to keep people engaged in your story without the gimmick feel?
And I think that, again, it has to do with time. How do you keep people engaged? You keep going, because it really is, everything is just this like sinusoidal cycle in life. And for me, I put out a reel that gets a lot of attention. It gets millions of views and it's hitting hard, and that's awesome. But then I put out the next series of stories over a couple weeks or a month, whatever, and it gets like 50,000, under 100,000 views, and okay. Which for me, like, that's percentage-wise a very small portion of my followers. Like, they're just not seeing my content. And that's okay, because I know I'm just going to keep authentically telling my story. And when it gets to the point where there's another big hitter, often people will see it and it'll get millions of views or whatever, but then they see it and they go, whoa, how did we get here? What? And then they go back. The people that really want to know, they go back and then they watch all of the reels in between. I talk about the sinusoidal cycle. So like if you have two peaks right here, they're going to go back to that valley and they're going to want to catch up to everything before the next peak. And if they don't, that's fine. But people love a story. People love episodes. And so to me, it's just that faith in that people will, no matter what, go back and catch up on the parts they want to catch up on. And don't worry so much about the views you're getting. It's not a gimmick. It's about being authentic about the way you're telling your story. And it's all going to pan out for you eventually.
That's it. I always love questions like this, because for me, it's like the fact that you're even asking this question says to me that you're somebody who doesn't need to worry about being gimmicky because you're even aware of it. It's like the people who are gimmicky don't even worry about that. At Sun Fraser said, how to tell a story authentically, knowing that people may and will judge parts of it.
Yeah, I've said it before. So I don't need to dive too much into it, but it's okay. Because you know what? If you're telling your story and you're telling it authentically, we are all humans and we have all fucked up and we have all made decisions or done things that we look back and we're like, that was a bit cringe. But you know what? If you learn from it and you have a message to share because of it, oh well. And it doesn't matter. And if people can't have enough compassion and empathy to understand that you are a person on your own journey and you're learning and changing, then they can get the hell out, because they probably don't have that same respect for themselves on their journey.
Yeah. You just said the word compassion, which leads into this next question. At Micah, I believe, said, how do you differentiate feeling sorry for yourself and feeling compassion for yourself? I love this question because I've heard a lot of folks express concern when they talk about sharing their story that, does this sound like that I'm, it's like a self-pity party or whatever? Like, where's the line there between being vulnerable and authentic and sharing what's really painful? And that being a sign of compassion and good storytelling versus wallowing in self-pity.
Yeah. At first it's a very blurry line. And I've said this before, and it deserves to be said again. I think part of the problem that I dealt with was I was a victim of my own abuse. Outside of Mormonism, when I left, I was trained to be a victim of my own abuse. And so for quite a while, when I was sharing things, I think it was from the perspective of feeling sorry for myself rather than compassion or building something empowering off of it. But you know what? I had to go through sharing things where I was feeling sorry for myself to eventually reach the point where I could look back with perspective of, that girl was totally a victim when she shared that. But now I can share it from a perspective where I'm not a victim. And so, people probably viewed my stuff that I posted on social media at that point, and depending on where they were at, they recognized it as more a victimhood mentality. But again, that's okay, because whether they stuck with me or not, now I've reached a point where I generally look back and I have compassion for myself, but I hold myself responsible for my actions. I hold others responsible for their actions.
Yeah.
And it's okay because I'm in a different place now. And so how do I differentiate now? I think it's all about the outcome. Am I sharing something for views, or am I sharing something because I truly think it was a stepping stone of me getting to where I'm at today? And I'm so proud of myself for recognizing it so that I can learn and change. And you get better at it as you go.
I feel like there's an inevitable beginning season that is so messy and gross and sloppy and sometimes impure and sometimes embarrassing. And it's just like this rite of passage for storytelling and putting yourself out there or whatever. And it's like, it's this inevitable mud that you kind of have to walk through and just be okay with it being what it is in order to get to a point to grow and evolve and change. And it kind of sucks because people want to come out of the gates looking perfect and having the perfect storytelling rhythm and perfect, intentions and all of this stuff. And it's like, you almost don't get to that place without figuring out what it's not first. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, totally. Everyone is free to go back and look at my reels from like 2 or 3 years ago, but it's totally different than the way I approach storytelling now. And you can almost tell that the perspective of how I view myself has changed in that time frame. I'm glad that I chose to be vulnerable enough. I posted online the day I went to court, and I legally changed my name to Irene. And then I posted my feelings after that of how different it was for me once I actually became Irene. Like, it wasn't just a third person in my story talking about Irene. Like, I became everything I wanted to be symbolically when I became Irene. And so, like, for me, I don't think everyone has to do that or probably wants to do that. I have chosen to journal my life on social media in a way that most would probably never choose to do, and that's perfectly fine. You can still be a good storyteller without doing all of that. But
Right.
I forget the original question. Oh yeah, that it is messy. I'm so happy that I chose to have messiness so that other people can see the growth in me to where I've gotten today. and hopefully more growth in the future.
Ray asked, how do you balance telling your authentic story with exposing others' parts in it?
Yeah, that's difficult. Yeah, because I've talked about the way that I was so hesitant to release things about my mom, and I'm getting to a place now where I am talking about my family. And for me, it's so important that I am telling my story from a perspective of my growth and my change, and how interactions I had with family members or others changed my perspective of myself or drove me to make a choice. My job is not to share other people's stories. For example, I'm talking about how I met my husband. My job is not to overshare information about his life or what his life was like before he met me or the things that made him his own character. I am only telling a story about my perspective of how my interactions with him changed me. And that has to do with my family as well. My job is not to talk about the way that my father or my mother interacted with each other outside of the way they interacted with me. Everything that is mine is okay to share, if that makes sense. But if it comes to a point where you're talking about other people where they were not interacting with you, or they were not directly affecting your own internal perspective of yourself, that's not yours to share. At least that's how I view it.
It's wisdom, girl. We'll wrap it up here, but I have a Heather question for you. That wasn't a listener question. It's a Heather question. What's the 412 behind you?
Oh, 412 it's a date. It is April 12th. And if you watch my music videos, you see my life fall apart. And then you see me discover this door behind me. We have hauled this door around to all parts of the country. It has seen more places than some people in their lives. And when we record music videos, the idea is that I keep, when I enter this door, I enter a new landscape where I need to learn something about myself, about my emotions, about the way I feel about myself. And so I enter this door multiple times. And sometimes I don't find this door, but this door is the key to my next landscape, this threshold that I cross through into understanding. And 412 is on the door because it's an address. In the first music video, I'm given an address, but 412 is a date. It's April 12th. It's the day that I received the letter from the lawyers that my name was officially removed from the records of the Mormon Church. It's also the day that I first legally held the name Irene. And it's just a date that multiple things seem to happen to me. April 12th has become a symbolic day for me, almost a day of change, if you will. And I hold it special. I usually have a special release on April 12th, an album, a single release, a music video. I've already planned next year. I'll be I will be at a venue and do this very big show. And then at midnight, there will be a toast to April 12th and the music video will drop. Like, much of my world revolves around
That's cool.
412.
I have a final question for you, but I am just so freaking thrilled that I got to meet you. Like, this recording was cool, and I'm really grateful for your time here. But beyond that, I'm just grateful that we got to spend time together the other day, and like I actually know you now, and you're in my world because you were just a gift. The wisdom that you have, the willingness you have to share really hard things that's happened to you, and the work that it takes to overcome all of that stuff is one thing, but the willingness to turn backwards and point to it and share it so that other people too can find the same freedom and hope, that is so admirable. And you're gifted and cool, and I love your music, and I'm just a big freaking fan of you. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to encourage my group of people in this corner of the world. If you had to direct these folks to one thing that you're working on, what would that be?
Let me first ask a question, because there's such an eclectic group of people that I am surrounded with. What are your people, and how would you identify yourself and your corner of the world? Let me ask that question first.
Yeah, so this is called Unconventional Leaders. I started this show. It's taken on a lot of different iterations over the years. But I started it because when I left the church and that whole world and started trying to find my calling and purpose. And I got into leadership, self-development. And when I looked around into it, it was a bunch of rich white dudes, and nothing wrong with rich and white dudes. I'm friends with rich white dudes, but I just didn't see myself represented in the people I chose to hang around. So I called the show Unconventional Leaders, because there's this group of folks who don't match the stereotypical mold of what a leader looks like. They're leading through their music. They're leading through their nonprofit. They're leading through their spoken word poetry, whatever it is. They're the artists, they're the creatives, they're the people who don't look like the traditional successful leader or CEO person, but they're making a freaking huge impact in this world. So we have a lot of different expressions of that who listen to the show, but at the end of the day, they feel a deep calling on their life to do something. And they're usually doing it in a very unconventional way. They're old souls, man. They're old souls.
Unconventional leaders. If that is the group that I'm speaking to, then I would just echo everything you said. You know what you're doing, and you know your message, and it's beautiful, because if you're going to be unconventional and you're going to lead, who are you if you can't lead yourself and understand yourself in your own landscape? And so before you start to try to lead others, always take an internal look first towards yourself. And if you feel that you understand yourself and you can lead yourself and you can authentically be yourself, then you're equipped to lead other people. And you're equipped to do it in unconventional ways. And that way happens to be however you feel moved to be creative in this world. Everything you just said.
That's it. And is there something specific you're working on that you think this group of folks would be the most interested in? I want to make sure I leave a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I forgot you asked that question. First and foremost, everybody views me kind of first and foremost as a musician, I would say. Please do go check out my music videos and the story that I'm telling through my music videos. You can look for Irene's Entropy on YouTube. But also check out my Instagram for the story that I'm telling in my social media platforms. But unbeknownst to other people, I've kind of launched a portion of something else I do for hire besides concerts, which is keynote speaking, and also concerts in the format of keynote speaking with music. So putting inspiring motivational content out there, but you're attending a concert. And it's not like not that there's anything wrong with it, time and place, but like, it's not like a hippie, like, type concert. Like, it's rock and roll, it's ballads, it's talking about hard subjects like what we've just done, but keynote speaking and motivational speaking with a concert. So I offer that to businesses, and I've kind of just started that. So please go to my website, irenesentropy.com. And yeah, some other fun things that'll be launching next year. But currently, I think that's the main meat.
Something that'll be linked in the show notes. Very last question for you. What is something that you are deeply questioning in this season of your life?
I can be real and vulnerable with you.
Hell yeah.
I am questioning, how much longer can I maintain a full-time job as an engineer in aerospace, which I deeply love, that I've entered that world and that I can inspire women in STEM. But how much longer can I maintain that and not be giving my full energy to what I really want to be doing in the world, which is storytelling and inspiring with creativity.
I know that you're wrestling with that question right now, but I got really excited when you said it because I'm like, hell yeah, let's go.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But I have to say before you end, this podcast, of all podcasts I have been on, you have done the most research ahead of time. Like, you have done your homework more so than any other podcast I've been on. And this is not a dig to anyone else I've interviewed with. Everyone's dealing with their own time frame and like only has enough time in the day. But I so appreciate the way that you're running this podcast. And to all listeners, take notes from Heather, that because she deeply cared about knowing my story before we got on this podcast, I was 10 times more excited to do this podcast. And I gave better answers than I've given on other podcasts, simply because of the way that she prepared herself and her energy to speak to me today. And that matters in what you do. So take note from Heather. Okay, that's my final thing to say.
You have no idea how much that meant to me. Thank you for saying that. Friends, I want you to click the link in the show notes. I want you to go through the YouTube videos and watch her music videos. And I want you to give her a follow over on Instagram and just see what happens over the next few years. I cannot wait to see your story continue to evolve. Love you guys. I hope this was encouraging to you. And go out there and share your story.